Another component I want to have a look at is the anode. And for the anode, we can also state a variety of requirements. So for this, we would like to have good electronic conductivity again, whereas a mixed conductivity would again be advantageous. This is for the same reasons as before. The anode has to transport electrons away from our fuel, so this is why we need electronic conductivity, but it also has to facilitate a reaction of ionic species. This is why mixed conductivity would be the best situation. Again, for the anode as well, we need compatibility with the electrolyte, like chemically and for thermal expansion. We of course want a high activity in the anode reaction. We need a chemical stability in a reducing atmosphere with moist air. And why is that? Well, a reducing atmosphere, well, because we have hydrogen on the anode side, this is why it should be stable against the reducing properties of hydrogen gas. And moist atmosphere, this is because water will be formed on the anode side, if you recall, because oxide ions are wandering through your electrolyte and they will form water on the anode side. So likewise, we would like to have a thermally stable material at varying temperatures, and again, having open porosity to facilitate a high number of active surface sites. Typical materials to be used in solid oxide fuel cells is a nickel YSZ cerament, and this a cerament is basically a composite of a ceramic and a material. So we incorporate nickel metal particles in a yttrium stabilized zirconia cerament in this case to get the stability from this YSZ and get catalytic activity from the nickel species. For this anode part, I would like to discuss also certain engineering concepts of the whole cell now. And there are different designs. First of all, I want to talk about planar designs. Planar designs can be either self-supported electrolytes or supported electrolytes. A self-supported electrolyte, as you can see, features a pretty much thin cathode, a pretty much thin anode, and a comparably massive electrolyte part. The advantage is that the whole cell is actually pretty much thin and stable. However, due to the very thick electrolyte, we typically have higher ohmic losses and also high operating temperatures because the ionic path length through the electrolyte is simply pretty high. If we have a supported electrolyte, that means our electrolyte is supported by an electrode, and this is typically by the anode. Here we do have lower ohmic losses, simply because we have a much thinner electrolyte layer in green here. Also, we can usually operate it at lower temperatures, also because the path length here through the electrolyte is effectively faster. However, we do have a slower mass transport as, of course, mass and ions and species in general, reactive species, have to be transported through this very thick anode layer. An alternative for the layout is the so-called tubular design or Siemens Westinghouse design. Here you're using as the name already implies, a tubular design where you have an airstream inside the tubes near the cathode. You do have a tube around being the electrolyte and another tube around which will again be surrounded by the fuel gas now. And then these tubes are arranged in a way next to each other, so they form this kind of design as you can see here. So all the centers of these tubes would be streamed through with oxygen or air basically, and around these tubes and in the center here, you would basically stream hydrogen. This design offers the advantage of a high mechanical stability due to this circular design here. However, you typically observe a low power density in this material and also a higher electric resistance. And this is due to longer path lengths, which you have to go along these tubes, and what the electronic conduction has to take. Another design would be the single chamber design. This is actually something which is pretty much novel design and still under development. So with this kind of design, you have a massive electrolyte. So you could say you have a self-supported electrolyte and a thin anode and cathode just on top in one common space. So the great thing about this is that you don't need any cell separation, you don't need any sealings, and you can miniaturize the system to a very high degree. The problem is, as you do not separate the two cells, that means your fuel and your oxidizer are both present in the atmosphere around these electrodes. So this means we typically have a lower fuel utilization, and we also do have parasitic reactions if the anode and the cathode are not 100% selective towards a certain reaction and towards a certain gas. So what we need for this kind of setup is highly selective electrodes. And this is a pretty big requirement, which requires also a lot of optimization of that system, and is something which is still pretty hard to achieve, because to some degree you will always facilitate non-selective reactions and therefore have parasitic reactions, all of which hampering your effective activity of your fuel cell. Lastly, I would like to give you a view to certain research trends going on. And one major research trend for the SOFC is the reduction of the operating temperature. You've seen that due to the necessity to facilitate oxide ion transport through the electrolyte, we saw that we require relatively high temperatures to operate the cell, which made it usable for stationary applications, but more or less blocked the availability for mobile or even portable applications. So to reduce the operating temperature, we do have a necessity for more reliable sealings. We need to reduce the electrode degradation, and we also want to remove the necessary heating for cell startup. And by lowering the operating temperature, we would also achieve a lower mechanical strain on the material. However, this implementation raises the necessity for better electrolyte conductivity. So all of these advantages which a reduction in operating temperature would bring are only successful if a sufficiently high electrolyte conductivity can also be maintained at these lower temperatures. And another disadvantage or challenge which this lower operating temperature will bring is that we, of course, effectively also slow down the anode and cathode reaction, so we also need more efficient catalysts on either side. Another research topic, which I already teased you a bit with one of these systematic layouts which we've looked at, is the miniaturization of the system. The miniaturization of the system could help replace batteries in certain fields, especially in portable application fields. It would allow for higher energy density. It would allow for using a variety of fuels, and it would pretty much use a already established manufacturing process. However, for this, we need to be able to manufacture mechanically stable membranes. This is especially a goal targeted towards manufacturing very thin membranes which are still mechanically stable. So that way we could utilize better ionic conductivity while not sacrificing on mechanical integrity. And the ultimate goal of this would, of course, be the manufacturing of a homogeneous, strain-free, and crystalline material, which can ideally be made in very thin layers, separating our anode and cathode.